Hi, this is the module User Management within DataMiner Configurator Level 2. Within Configurator Level 2, we have been looking at creating that nice graphical layer on top of my system. We've created some nice visual overviews, some nice dashboards, and even some low-code apps. Now the time is right to add more people to my system so that all of those users can leverage the great work we have been doing here. So within user management, we will manage all the people that have access to my system and also what they can and cannot do or see within the DataMiner system. So there's a lot of security settings we can define in here. Let's take a look at that. So first of all, we will take a quick look at the introduction and then dive into the identification and authentication. Basically, I need to log in with a username and a password. And once I'm logged in, I need to look at the authorization. What can that person do or what will he or she not be able to see? We also, of course, want to make sure that we have decent auditing and logging on what a person does and what the actions are that this person did. And in DataMiner, we basically make use of groups. So the users will be a member of one or more groups to define what they can and cannot see. During the video, we will create a group, we will create a user, we will play around with it. There's also an exercise at the end you can play with, which does the same thing. So let's dive into it and first take a look at the introduction. So we definitely need to make sure that we have decent user management because that is important that every person that accesses my system has his own personal account. So that's already a good starting point, I would say. Try to avoid shared accounts because then it's difficult to know who did what. So typically you want to go for personal individual accounts. And we'll also take a look at that we can leverage already existing accounts, for instance, from an Active Directory or a SAML authentication provider. So we'll do that identification and authentication, and then we also will need to define what those people can or cannot do. That's within the authorization. So within the authorization, we will have a whole bunch of settings with all the different things you can do in a DataMiner system or associated with a security right. Can a person edit an element? Can they add an alarm template? Can they change a trend template or add a new driver in there? So all of the different actions in a DataMiner system are associated with a security right. And of course, once they are into the system, they will. There is also extensive audit trailing and logging of what a person does when they log in, when they do certain settings on certain elements. All of the actions are being tracked in there. So it is important to nicely configure your security settings by defining all the necessary users and groups so that you have a good audit trailing and logging. Where can you do that? Well, that's within the System Center. So on the sidebar, we need to go to the Apps section. Within the Apps section, underneath Modules, you will have that System Center. And within System Center, we do have the Users and Groups module there, which is the one that we will be further looking into it. Let's take a look at that on our training system. So I'll be using the training system provided by Skyline Academy. And I'll create a user there. You can also do it on your DAS system or on your own private system as well. So we'll be going to the Apps section. So if I go to Apps, you will have there the System Center. If I open up the System Center, there are a whole bunch of things here which are more for the admin section. But we are here focusing on the Users and Groups section. Important to know is that for the users and groups, you have the two tab pages there. You manage the users or you manage the groups. So you have both things there. If you select a user, like I select myself here, I see all the settings on the right hand side. Same thing for a group. If I select the group administrators, for instance, I see the settings on the right hand side with the different tab pages there. So we'll be looking at managing those users and groups and also adding some by using the buttons at the bottom side there. So that's how the UI looks like. Very simple. We have some users and we can add them to some groups to define what they can or cannot see. Okay, so first of all, the identification and authentication. So I need to log in with a certain username and passwords. Well, the most easy thing would be to just go for a local user on the DataMiner system itself. So that's actually one that we will create. That's completely independent. I can just add a new user in there. I specify a username. I specify a password. Simple and easy. The DataMiner system doesn't really manage any users. So what will happen is that this new user that you add, those local users, they will just be added to the Windows operating system, and it's the Windows operating system managing the users. So if you wonder about password complexity or the length or the expiration or any of these things, we just refer to the standard Windows operating systems features you have there. So with group policies and all of these things, you can configure, for instance, a minimum length on a password, or that it must need to expire after a certain amount of time. So all of these things are supported. You just configure it on the Windows operating system and it will be applicable to the users in the DataMiner system because you have a one-on-one match with those users. Okay, but I already have a user. I have my domain account and I do everything with my domain account. I log in the morning on my computer with my domain account, and I want DataMiner to use my domain accounts. Perfectly possible. And I would even say that's maybe the recommended way of doing that, because you don't want to have like separate users for separate systems. No, I have one account, my domain user, and I want to use it for all of the applications. So you can actually very easily integrate with Active Directory domain users. So if you just, if you are on-prem, you can just join that DataMiner agent to the domain, and all the domain users will become available, and you can start adding some domain users in here. So they are located underneath the domain section. Okay, some of them are already added in here. Okay, that's perfectly possible, but there's also the possibility to integrate with an external identity provider with SAML. So if you have your accounts already available in Azure Active Directory, for instance, or in an Okta identity provider, then you can also just point the DataMiner system to Azure Active Directory or to Okta or to other SAML identity providers. You can find more information in our docs on SAML integrations with Okta, Azure Active Directory, these kind of identity providers. So more details you can find about that in our docs and how to set it up, because you need to make that link to that identity provider. It's not a purpose of this session to go into the configuration details of this SAML setup, but here we kind of assume we already have things set up. So if you want to have any more information, I would like to refer to the docs.dataminer.services for SAML integrations. Okay, if I'm a member of a domain, or if I did that SAML authentication or a SAML integration with an identity provider, I can just basically pick and choose users from that domain or from that identity provider. And those users will then be added in here as domain users, which are basically existing users somewhere else. The username and the password is managed by that identity provider. This identity provider is securely managing that user, and which is the recommended way of using that external identity provider. Does have the advantage you can also use MFA, for instance, to have an extra authentication and extra security onto your accounts. So that is also possible from that external identity provider. So The recommended way would be to go for the modern authentication, I would say, for SAML. Then you have MFA. It's nicely protected with all the goodies that your identity provider supports in terms of security. If you don't have a SAML authentication provider possibility, then I would go for Active Directory integration. If that is not possible as well, then I would say you can still fall back to the local accounts. Note there is also the cloud users there. That's more for the shares that you created. That's something which is automatically managed. You don't really need to worry too much about that. That's something that comes along with your shares. Okay, so in our case, we will create a local user, but be aware that typically you want to reuse the accounts you already have, your domain account or your Microsoft account, for instance, in Azure Active Directory. So that's how I identify myself against the DataMiner system and be able to log in. You might have noticed that there are two separate icons, a blue one and a gray one in the domain section. Well, a little word about that is that those are either automatically added users or manually added users. The blue ones are kind of like, you could say, active because you manually picked, in this case, Wouter here and added him in here. The other ones here are like Jens, for instance, is a little bit gray. It's available, but it has less flexibility. Why is that? Well, Jens was automatically added because of the Active Directory, looking at Jens and seeing like, oh, Jens is part of, for instance, the DataMiner engineers. So he is automatically being added because he's member of a group, or that external identity provider defined that he was member of a certain group and added this person automatically. If they are like a little bit in the gray there, it also means that you cannot remove them. You cannot add them, you cannot remove them. Well, you didn't add them, they were automatically being added, but you cannot remove them as well. They need to be automatically removed as well by going to the identity provider and removing Jens there, for instance, from the group DataMiner engineers, and then he would also automatically disappear here because DataMiner just follows whatever is configured in your identity provider. Nothing else, nothing more. Whenever you add Jens or remove Jens from a group, he will be added here or removed here, depending on what you do in that identity provider. So the blue ones are manually picked, manually added users. You are in control, you added Wouter here. The gray ones are automatically managed and synced with something in your external identity provider or directory there. I'll come back to that when we add groups, just to make sure that it's crystal clear here. Okay, so I'm able to log in with my username and I specify a password, a local user or a Microsoft account or a domain account, doesn't really matter. Somewhere I authenticate against some authentication provider, and then I need to be, other way around, authorized, and I need to be able to do something in DataMiner. To be able to do something in DataMiner, we use groups. So for defining what a person can or cannot do, we need to rely on security groups that we add in the DataMiner system. Here you have a couple of groups that were added already. So we have like an admin group, probably the administrators that have a lot of access, and we have the read-only group, people with limited access, for instance, that we can define in there. So if we take a look at how a group is identified, the most important thing is the permissions tab page there. The permissions tab page consists out of two things: the rights, which we have here, and the views, which we have on the right-hand side. So those are the two things that basically define what a user can and cannot do. In the rights, you will find a checkbox, and you don't really see because you need to move your mouse over it to see where you can expand. This is a whole tree structure with a whole bunch of settings, and I can immediately show you. For instance, if I go to a group, I take the administrators, I go to permissions. And if I take a look, for instance, for elements, I can define, yeah, okay, I can access elements, but can I also add new elements or edit existing elements or delete elements or export to CSV? So for elements, you can have all of these things also, for instance, for an alarms. Is the alarm console available? Yes or no? But okay, if it is available, can you do masking and unmasking and taking and releasing ownership? And all of these settings are all in there with all the different things we have already seen. So you can basically say that every action in a DataMiner system is associated with a security right. Now, you might say like, yeah, there's like a gazillion checkboxes there. Well, therefore we have here at the top, let me go back to the demo. We have at the top the possibility to quickly go for a preset. Note in one of the next versions, this preset drop down will actually be a panel on the right hand side. So that's the same thing on the right hand side here. And that allows you to go for a certain preset. In the newer version where it's on the right hand side, you can immediately also tweak new presets, add new presets, import, export, these kind of things. So, but the default presets we have in this version is like operators. And then we come with like a good starting point, you could say. Operators, yeah, the elements, what can they do? They can access elements, but they cannot add and edit or delete elements. So that's typically not what an operator should be able to do. So that's what an operator can do. An administrator or a power user will be able to do more, and an administrator even more. You can also have an administrator, and that's an important one, with read-only access to security, because if you go for an administrator and you limit access to a certain site, well, they will be able to change their own security because they have access to security. That's why we have administrators without access to the security as well. Otherwise, they can change their own security. So those are just some starting points for the checkboxes. You can play around with that. The reset is just if you tweak certain things that you can reset again to operators, for instance. Okay, so think about that preset, that this gives you a little bit of a starting point on the checkboxes. So the rights define what you can and cannot do. The views, on the other hand, they define what you can and cannot see. And that's why I mentioned before in that surveyor tree structure, in that hierarchical structure, it is very important to make a logical tree structure there, because here you can define what a person can and cannot see. So does this person, well, he's, for instance, based in Europe, so it makes sense. I give access to Europe. Maybe USA, they don't need to see that, so I can easily disable that. But it's also possible to give a little bit more read-only access and config access. I'll come back to that later on as well. And note, you can further open up that tree structure. Let's take a look at that. If we go to views, I can say, for instance, I disable everything, but then I go to operations, Europe, and I can say, for instance, oh, they can give access to Amsterdam and London and Paris, something like that, for instance. And note, you can also open it up and go for one single element as well. Not the complete Rome site, but only one element is available in there. That's also possible. Up to element level, you can do that. So you define what they can do, and you define where they can see the things. That's the groups you define. So you will never configure security on an individual user. You will always create users and then make them member of one or more groups in there. Okay, so whenever I add a group in there, I will be able to add users in there. So on the users page, I can move users from the left-hand side to the right-hand side to include users in here. So that's how I can add and remove users. Note, if this is a group like this one on the right-hand side, which is a domain group, because it's possible to create just a local group like the read-only one, and then it's completely blue highlighted. I can manage everything, I can change everything. If it's a group that I've picked from the domain, then it means like in this case that all the DataMiner trainers, it's a little bit small, but it says all the DataMiner trainers, and here is the list of all those users. In one click, they all have access to the DataMiner system, and on the permissions tab, I can define what they can and cannot see, those DataMiner trainers. But I cannot change users here. Here I can define in the read-only group who is member of the read-only group. Here I cannot define who is member of the training group or the DataMiner trainers group. No, that's not possible because that group and who is member, yes or no, is defined in my domain. So who is a member of this group is outsourced, you could say, to the domain. So if a new guy comes in Skyline and he becomes a DataMiner trainer, he is added by our IT to the DataMiner trainers group, and immediately he will be added in here. And he will have access to the system without me doing anything. This is completely zero touch, you could say. I don't need to manage anything here. So think about that possibility to immediately add groups from the domain as well. That can come in quite handy. Okay, so users are member of groups and inherit the rights from the groups. So be aware that you can actually add a user in more than one group, and then they will get the best of both worlds. So if I add a person to the read-only group, and I also add this person to the admin group, he is basically an admin because he will get the combination of both groups, the best of both worlds, and have basically like admin rights, you could say. Okay, so once you added those users, you made them a member of one or more groups so that they can access and see certain things. We do, of course, have our audit trailing, and we have our logging. So basically, every single action you do in a DataMiner system is being tracked. If I go to a specific user, I can see all of his details and things like that. The last page shows me the activity. The activity shows 2 tab pages there, all the recent sessions when this person logged in with Cube or with an HTML5 app, and all the actions. The actions are like changing configuration, adding an alarm template, but also changing a setting on a frequency on a device, for instance. All of these things, all the parameter sets are being tracked in there, and all the settings in a DataMiner system are being tracked. Also, of course, if you go for the information events, you can get the information events from the history. You can easily filter there as well and say, show me everything that Wouter has been doing, so I can easily see all the actions in there as well. So if you are investigating something that happened yesterday, and if you include those information events, you will immediately be able to see like, oh, this person logged in here, he was also accessing that element, doing some settings on those parameters. You all have that combined together in here. Let's have a quick look. I'll be looking at my user, and I can also access my user. Well, you can access a user from here, but you can also always access from the upper right hand side. Click on your icon and go to account details there, and there you see a little bit the same thing for your user. And the last page you have is the activity. Once you click on activity, it fetches from the database all the settings, the recent sessions I had. So today I opened up Cube, the HTML5 apps, and I can also see some recent actions. I've been playing with security already, changing some alarm templates or changing the audio output level. All of these things are nicely tracked in there. So you can see all of that is nicely tracked in the information events in my DataMiner system. Also, if a person, so the recent sessions is mentioned here. Also, if an authentication would fail, it is being tracked. So here we have an authentication failure that is being tracked in the information events. And we do have, that's a little bit more in depth. If we go to our logging module, we'll take a closer look at that in the admin center later on in the advanced sessions. So here in the logging, you do have underneath DataMiner, you have the SLNet log file, and there you can actually see some more details why the connection did not authenticate there. That's already a little bit more low level deep dive log file kind of thing, but you can see that even authentication failures are being tracked, which is also important security wise. Okay, that being said, let's take a look at the groups and the users and create one in the DataMiner system so that we get the hang of it. Okay, so first things first, well, when we will add a user, we will need to be able to add it to a group. So let's first take a look at groups. So at the bottom of the group, so make sure you are on the group section, of course, you have two possible groups you can add. You can go for a brand new group, and then the only thing you need to specify is a name. That's it. And then you will basically have a new group that is being added. It is also possible to go for existing group, and then if your system is member or is joined to a group, to a domain, sorry, if your DataMiner node is joined to a domain, then you will see all the existing domain groups, which is kind of interesting. So you just have to join the server to the domain, and then you can come here and say like, oh, add existing, and I will see on there, oh, let's take those guys here. They are from the domain create lab core. I just select this group, and in one click, I add the whole team to the DataMiner system, and I define their security rights. If somebody new is joining that team tomorrow, he's added to the domain group there, automatically he will be added and given access to the DataMiner system. If he leaves for another team, he's removed from that group, he will automatically be removed from the DataMiner system. So here we nicely follow whatever is applicable there. This is domain integration. You can do the same thing with a SAML authentication. It's a little bit different. We have support for Azure Active Directory. So there we can also, with a client secret, you need to make sure that your groups you have configured the DataMiner system to be able to retrieve the group settings. Not only the SAML authentication, but also retrieving the groups must be configured. If we are able to do so, we will get the groups from your Azure Active Directory. There is actually with SAML, if for instance you have an Okta integration, there is also something called like auto provisioning possible. Whenever they are authenticated in Okta, and they are getting through the authentication in Okta, and they are allowed here, defined by Okta, then we will automatically add them in the DataMiner system and allow them to be added in like a default landing group, you could say. Or we can also get claims from the SAML authentication provider in which group they must be added. So you can use claims with SAML authentication, or you can just drop them into a default landing group. That's auto provisioning, which is also supported. Okay, so it is possible to leverage existing groups in a domain or in a SAML environment, but we will create a brand new group in our DataMiner system and play around with that. All right, so let's go in there and we will create not users, but groups. So let's go to groups. Did I change something? Let me cancel here. Yes, indeed, I was a little bit before playing around here. So I will create a brand new group and I will call it, for instance, training underscore Bert. Okay. What is level? Level is, you can define a level on a group and also override it on a user. That's to go a little bit more up to parameter level, because a parameter in a connector, you can define that and give it a level. So if you have certain parameters that are like, a little bit like, let's say, sensitive parameters that you don't want to provide to everybody. So for instance, let's say kind of like a reset or a reboot or something like that. You say like, okay, that's a dangerous parameter. You can give that a certain level and then also define a level in here so that you allow, for instance, administrators to have access to that parameter, and operators, they don't have access to that parameter. That's what you can do with level. More information also in docs if you want to play around with that, but that's already very far into details because we go on to parameter level. So I just specify my name and I don't really worry about the level, and it's adding a new group in there, which is training BERT. There's nothing in there yet, no user in there yet. The first thing I will do is I will define those permissions. So that's the first thing I need to do when adding a group in there. So here you can see the difference between the local group and the external groups. So a local group, that's kind of like blue active kind of thingy, where you can change the name and you can manage the users. That's a local group, you have full control there. If you would pick and choose a group from a domain, then you will see it's a little bit more like gray, not really dimmed out, but a little bit more towards the disabled state because the name is, for instance, disabled. It's taken from the domain. I cannot change the name of a group here. The name is coming from the group that we have found in the domain. So the name, if you want to change it, let's look at the domain. And also the members, who is in there and who is not in there, is defined in the domain. You cannot change that here. There's no way of changing this here. We need to manage the group completely in the domain. The name and the members are managed in the domain itself. So think about that, those two different groups. We'll go for a local group in our exercise here, like I already just did. So once I defined that group, I have to define the permissions. So that's the most important thing, define what this group can or cannot see and do. The first thing is the rights. Let's take a look at the rights. So we go to permissions of my newly created training BERT group. And as I mentioned, we can go for a preset there, which is kind of a nice starting point. You can do a couple of things. You can go for like, oh, let's make this person an administrator and then maybe tone it down a little bit. Or you can go from no rights and then build it up, you could say. Or you can go somewhere from a starting point like operators or power users. For instance, power users, those people will already have more access, like editing elements are possible, things like that. But things like within system configuration, and that's an important section, system configuration, that's basically this system center app, you could say. One of the most important settings or checkboxes in there is the security one. This one can view users from other groups, but they cannot really change. They are no administrator here. While, for instance, an administrator would have full access here, and an administrator with read-only access doesn't have the possibility to change the security again anymore. So you always have to make sure that they cannot edit themselves and give them more access to the system, because it's not only about these checkboxes, but it's also about the view structure. Maybe you don't give them access to a certain site. Well, make sure that they cannot change it by going here underneath system configuration security and remove the administrator action there. Okay, so yeah, all the other ones, there is more help also available in docs if you want to take a look at that, but you can play around with that. I will create an operator, and I will go for the default preset that is defined in here. So this means that I won't be able to add, edit, and delete elements. So that's going to be more limited. Well, let's maybe do one thing. I'll allow editing. just as a quick example. Okay, I will apply that already so that this one is already saved. Okay. As I said, the presets might be already in the newer version on the right-hand side. Next to the rights, I need to define what they can and cannot see. This group of users, where do they have access? So I can really go into that tree structure, define every single view, what is going to be visible for that group, yes or no. But also on the right-hand side, there are two important checkboxes. The first one is the write access that enables parameter write access. So do you allow those users to do writes on the parameters? Are they able to change the audio output level? Are they able to change the frequency of all the elements in Europe? Yes or no? You need to define here, are they able to configure all the parameters on the elements? Can they change the admin state of a Cisco switch in that specific site? Yes or no? Is that write access allowed? Yes or no? So the checkbox in front of the site is that view available? Yes or no? Can they see it? Then you need to define, can they actually change settings on the elements? And the last one, config, is do you allow them to change things in DataMiner, like editing the element, changing or adding new elements in there. So with this, you can actually allow them to, for instance, edit elements in Europe, but not in here. So that's with the last checkbox you can do. And I'll do that in my example as well. Let's take a look at that. Because I said that within elements, they can edit. Okay, yeah, it's an operator that can edit. I have to be careful here. So let's take a look where they can edit, because I don't want them to edit everywhere. So first of all, I'll go and give them a little bit of access in Europe. But they don't need all the sites. So let's, for instance, go and give them access to you can also go up to element level, but I'll go for just views. Rome and London and Amsterdam, for instance. But within Rome, I will give them a little bit more limited access so that they cannot edit elements there. So they will be able to edit elements in London, but not in Rome. And also the write access I will take away. So Rome will be rather limited. They will be able to view the status of Rome, but they won't be able to change an audio output level there, and they won't be able to edit an element. While in the London side, they will see that London site, but they will also be able to change the audio output level, and they will even be able to edit those elements and maybe change the alarm template or trend template. So here I gave them a little bit more, like you could say, like a local administrator. Those users will be able to fully manage London, make changes on the elements, and also manage those elements in DataMiner. And Rome, well, they are not really the administrators of Rome. They don't need to have full access there, but it's interesting for them to know the status of Rome, because if something is happening with the signal reception in London, it's interesting to know if they also have that same problem in Rome, yes or no. So is this more a local problem, or is this more, for instance, like a more global problem? All right, so London, full access, Rome, limited access. Okay, perfectly fine. And that's the only thing this person or this group of users will see. So it will actually be a rather limited and simple system. So you can make really DataMiner a very easy and simple system. Only a very limited number of views are added in there, and the rights are really trimmed down onto what is really needed. Also, the web apps, you can define that they, for instance, only have access to dashboards if you only want to share dashboards with them. That's also possible, of course. Okay, so we defined what they can do, and we defined where they can basically do that and see things. Full access to Rome, limited access to Rome, full access to London. All right, so now is the time to create a user. Let me maybe make sure that I apply that. Yes, I applied it. So my views is applied. Okay. Now let's add a user. So we need to add a user now. And again, we can add two different types of users. Just a brand new local user or an existing user that I pick and choose from the domain or the identity provider. So if I go for new user, you will get the pop-up. That's the same pop-up you get into when you add a Windows local user on the operating system. So you need to specify the details as mentioned there, name, full name, password, email, whatever, all of these things. Does your password never expire? Must change password at next log on. Those are the kind of like default things. So that's what I will immediately do, and I will create a local user there. I could also pick and choose an existing user, and then it will give me all the users that are already available on the Active Directory or on the SAML identification providers. Like Azure Active Directory, we can also get the users from there. Note, if you, for instance, work with Okta or another SAML authentication provider, you can also work with auto-provisioning. Auto-provisioning means that we won't manage any existing users in here or local users in here. We will basically define the security in Okta, and whenever they are authenticating correctly against Okta, and in Okta, we said like, okay, this person can access the app DataMiner. We allow them through, then they are authenticated. And then in DataMiner, the user comes in, authenticated, all good. Then we say like, oh, okay, Okta says it's fine. So it's fine for us. We will add this user. If this user is already in there, okay, no problem. If the user is not yet in this list, we will automatically add this user in there and make this user member of a default landing group, you could say, a security group that you say like this is the default one where all the new persons are arriving in. Or we can also get claims from the SAML authentication provider that basically Okta is telling us like, oh, this user needs to be member of operators or administrators, and then we know in here which group they should be added to. So that is what we call auto-provisioning. You can also find more information on that topic in the docs. So we'll go for a new user and add this user in there. And then we basically have a local user that we can fully manage in the DataMiner system. We can change the name in there. All of the things are managed in DataMiner. If we manually picked one of the domain users, then the username is no longer able to change it here, but you can still specify or override certain things like the email. You can still change that in here. If they are automatically taken from the external identity provider, because, for instance, you added a group, and all of those users from that group are immediately added. That's an automatically added external user. Then they are fully read-only, because then we assume that everything is managed in the domain, and you should make sure that the email and all of these things are correct on that site. Okay, so those are the three types of users we have: a local user or a domain user, which is manually added or automatically added. Okay, and once we added the user, we must give that person at least access by joining it or making it member in at least one security group. Don't forget to do that, because if a user is not member of any groups, they won't be able to log into the DataMiner system. We say something like an error message like this user is not member of any groups, so they won't be able to log in. They cannot see anything. So at least one group must be added. If you add multiple groups, as mentioned here, they will basically get the best of both worlds. If I'm an administrator and an operator, then basically I get the combination, which is kind of like, again, administrator, you could say. Okay, so that's what we will do in our exercise now. So we created our group just before. We now need to create a user by going to the Users tab page. So yeah, a small note, there is always a built-in administrator, which is kind of like if you would no longer have access, the administrator is always available in there, which is the Windows administrator account if you use it. So let's go for training underscore Bert. It can be the same. It's a little bit confusing maybe. Bert underscore user. Let's put it like that. So, the most important thing is just to make sure that you also have a password on there, which needs to be a minimum length. Not sure if it's like 12 characters or something like that on these systems. And typically like a minimum password complexity with lowercase, uppercase, and some number or character kind of complexity. Let's add this user. So I added a training Bert user. Note I didn't specify a full name. I could also specify a full name, Bert VDB, just to make sure that it's different. That's more like you could say the display name. So the Bert VDB is the display name, and the login name that I need to provide in the username password login screen is this longer underscore version. Okay, don't forget to add your user to at least one group. That's a typical thing. So let me add it to our training Bert. Okay, let's add it perfectly. Okay, don't forget to go for the apply on the lower right hand side. Apply your settings, and then they will update, and you will see this user is now a member of this training Bert. If you would add this person to one or more groups, then it might be interesting to also see what kind of combination you have now. What is the result? Well, you can see the result by going to the permissions, and there you can again see all of those checkboxes. So all the checkboxes are here, but read only, because you can never change security on a user. You always need to do it on groups. But since this person might be member of multiple groups, it is interesting to see the combination and the result that this person will experience. Here it is, of course, only what we configured in that one group there. Also here, I'm not able to change those settings in here. Permissions can only be edited on a group level. It's nicely indicated in the header. Okay, I think I'm good. I configured my user, and I can see that the permissions are updated here. So London will have full access, Rome will have limited access. So now is the time to play around and take a look at that. So I can do that by going to sign out and go to other user, and then define that I copied it before so that I wouldn't have to type. Oh. Don't really have to remember this is a test user. It doesn't have to remember me. All right, so this looks like a very easy system. Only 2 alarms are in here. If I go into operations, only Europe exists in here. We only have 3 sites in here. If I go to London, I kind of expect again to have full access. So I should be able to change the audio output level indeed. So let's change that to 6. Yeah, it's again there with the confirmation, because this is a brand new user. It has brand new settings on like my custom tab pages in the alarm console are not there anymore. This is a brand new default user. So I can change the audio output level. Perfect. And I can even go to right click and edit. Yeah, edit is in here. Delete is not in here, but edit is in here. Okay, perfect. I can even do an edit. Let's now check out Rome. And I can see Rome, but let's go into one of those audio output level. No settings possible here. I have read only. I can do all the readings, but I can not do any settings in here. Let's check out the right click menu. There's no possibility to edit that anymore. So the edit is not available in there, while I have here the edit in there. So you can see that this user has kind of like read-only access to Rome, but has full access, kind of like even admin access, but I can even edit elements into the London side. And it's a very simple system because I only have a limited number of sites in here. So you can see with security, you can nicely define what this group of users can and cannot do. So I've mentioned that you can immediately look to the consolidated view of the permissions of a user that we have done. Just a small note on the deleting of a user. You can right click and delete a user. You can always delete, of course, the local users. That's not a problem, and they will automatically be removed from the Windows operating system level. So it's completely gone. It's a different story about domain users. We will never touch the domain. We only read out information from the domain. So if you remove a manually added user here, like Jason or Wouter, the blue ones, I manually picked those two guys and added them in here. I can also remove them again. But I just removed the reference in the DataMiner system. Of course, those domain accounts are still there. Those guys will still be able to log in the morning. We never touch information from the external identity providers. The gray ones, that's a little bit different because they are kind of like disabled, you could say, a little bit grayed out, dimmed out. So I don't have that much flexibility here. So they are automatically added because I added a whole group into the DataMiner system, so I'm not able to delete those users in here. If I want to change something to those users, I need to go to the domain and take a look at removing those persons from those groups, yes or no, and then DataMiner will follow. Okay, so the exercise is a little bit a similar thing as we just did. So we create a group, we create a user, and we verify the results. So with this, the session has come to an end. I think this is a very useful session because security is extremely important. You need to make sure that the necessary people have access in a secure manner, and you define what they can and cannot do so that they don't have too many rights to mess up your system, you could say. So build your security in a good and tight way. That's very important. And think about that integration with existing accounts, because that's definitely an advantage to do that. I hope you enjoyed this session and see you in the next one.